evening to you, and welcome to today's edition of Politics 101, Tuesday evening. And of course, if it's Tuesday, it's time for us to get behind the news, um, get some analysis here, um, help us understand what's happening around us. I just returned from Guyana last night after a couple of weeks, spending a couple of weeks. Um, and it's really amazing. I prior to this trip, I was in Guyana. I was away from Guyana just 6 or 7 weeks, and it's amazing that every time you go back, you're away for a couple of weeks. Things seem to just change. I mean, the society in which things are happening so quickly that it's a little bit frightening. I remember feeling that same way about Trinidad and Tobago. Well, Trinidad more than Tobago. When you stay away from Trinidad for a year or so, and you go back, it's like you're looking at a new society. And I remember being quite scared of where Trinidad was going at that pace. And those of us who follow the news coming out of the wider Caribbean would know that that society is really moved so fast, and crime has gotten out of control. A whole bunch of things that did not affect the rest of the Anglophone Caribbean in that way, but the rest of the Anglophone Caribbean really caught up. And I seem to feel that way about Guyana every time I stay away for a couple of weeks and go back. Seem to think that so much is changing there. I don't know. When you come from these former colonial outposts and you are accustomed to a certain pace of life, and then all of a sudden things seem to move so quickly, it calls for a lot of analysis of what's going on, our scholars, our journalists are accustomed to covering, a society that moves at a normal pace. People refer to us in the Caribbean as laid-back people who, take our time. We have a good time. We have a good laugh. We sometimes don't take things as seriously as other people in other parts of the world. But has that changed? Has it changed in relation to Guyana? Good evening to everybody. I notice a person here, Donna Brown, I think West Bank people, as we would say. Welcome down, Donna. I noticed Cheryl is with us, Cheryl Gillis, Onika Fraser, Shallon Hillman. Welcome down, everybody. Glenford Gordon, who's a regular. Vibert White, the man from the East Bank. Grove. We have so many groves. Grove on the East Bank, Grove, Golden Grove on the East Coast, another Golden Grove on the West Coast of Belize, and somebody was telling me about another one in Essequibo. Welcome to everybody, and my brother Coffee, who is really a stalwart. Welcome everybody, and welcome to a new week. This weekend, March 13th, for those of us who pay attention again to the politics of the wider Caribbean, March 13th, of course, is the anniversary of the Grenadian Revolution. Grenadian Revolution, 1979. So what's 43 years since the Grenadian Revolution?
To the basic differences between standard of living and quality of life in a tabular form. Difference number 1. Standard of living is used to refer to the level of income, necessities, services, and other material well-being which are regulated.
I'm hearing some song, Mr. Moderator. Can you please check your controls there. Yes, 43 years ago, since the Grenadian Revolution, my generation, it was a big deal. It was the first quote unquote armed revolution in the English speaking Caribbean. There were lots of excitement around it. It lasted all of 4 years, 4.5 years, and it went up in blood and smoke in 1983. But people still each year revisit the Grenadian Revolution. Whenever I've been at conferences, academic conferences, and that issue came up, some people will either be cussing out or some people will be crying out. So divisive that revolution became. And so it was the 43rd anniversary of the Grenadian Revolution. Some of the younger people may have to read about it, but it was a very important moment. I asked my students in their exam, my Caribbean politics exam, about revolutions in the Caribbean. They remember the Haitian Revolution and the Cuban Revolution, but some of them didn't remember the Grenadian Revolution. When I asked them why they said they simply forgot about it because the rest of the Caribbean seems so unrevolutionary. Like there is Maurice Bishop, the leader, who, along with Fidel Castro and Daniel Ortega. It was an age of revolution. We had the Nicaraguan Revolution led by Ortega. Of course, the Cuban Revolution was already there. We had the Iranian Revolution of 1979, when the Shah of Iran was overthrown. We had Milton Obote of Uganda, who was overthrown around that time. It was just an age of revolution because Jimmy Carter, the American president, had changed the foreign policy and said that American foreign policy would no longer be guided by support for capitalism. And America was during the context of the Cold War. And he said it would be a human rights based, it would be a foreign policy based on human rights. And that opened the door for a lot of revolutions during that period, uprisings. We had in the Caribbean around that time the Suriname Revolution, February 1980. The Dominicans overthrew their government. Patrick John was overthrown in 1979. The St. Lucians got rid of John Compton, not through demonstrations, but at the ballot box, but it seemed as though it was. And then there was a very known uprising in our Caribbean that happened in December of 1979. And that was the Union Island uprising. Rastafarians staged an uprising and wanted to secede from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And that led to Barbados sending troops in to help the St. Vincent government. They didn't have an army to help them put down the Union Island rebellion. It led to that famous Calypso by Gabi. Boots, boots, and more boots, sent to put down a non-existent rebellion. He was chiding the Barbados Prime Minister for sending troops in, but that led to the formation of the regional security system. And notice Guyana has now joined the RSS. And the RSS was a Cold War imposition to beat back rebellion and revolution in the region. So there were uprisings all over. It was the period when Michael Manley was thrown out of power through regime change for daring to declare Jamaica a democratic socialist country and standing with Castro and in sending troops to Angola to help to push back the South African apartheid regime. Those were very interesting times, amusing, as they say, on our own history and March 13. So tonight we're going to get behind the news. What's happening? As I said, I left Guyana yesterday and everyone was scrambling, I noticed, out of concern that the war that's going on in between Russia and America in Ukraine, note my language, the war between Russia and America, or Russia and the West in Ukraine, because it's not a war, in my estimation, between Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine has gotten caught in the middle, just as we in Guyana got caught in the middle 2 years ago. And we are not off the hook yet. But anyhow, people are concerned about the economic impact of that war in Guyana. I saw flour, the price of flour went up, and it's now hoarding has started. Dog food, imported dog food, I understand the price of that has went up. People are buying all these crates of things and hoarding them and so on. So it seems as though there's going to be quite an impact of on Guyana, of what's happening there between America, the West, Ukraine on the one hand, and Russia. We're going to talk about that. What's the real and potential impact? Quite apart from the two political scientists that I have on tonight, Dr. Henry Jeffrey, Tabitha Sarbo-Ali, who is here in her capacity, not as an MP, not as a party leader. She's a political scientist, trained political scientist by the West. So she's on as a political scientist. And then our economist, Elson Lowe, who is going to lead us tonight in working through the potential economic impact of what's happening there with that war. President Ali continues to talk about this one Guyana and threatening that if people stand in his way, that is not going to be allowed. So it's one Guyana, and the government is very clear that it is going to push through his agenda. We're going to be talking about that. There is talk about local government election, and of course we know that GCOM has started the house-to-house registration. You know, there are differences between the opposition and the government about how that is going to happen. Differences between the commissioners, the government-aligned commissioners and the opposition-aligned commissioners. So we're going to be talking about that also. Former opposition leader, Mr. Joseph Harmon, is set to resign formally from Parliament, to resign from Parliament this week, I think today or tomorrow. And in any country, that's news. In Guyana, it's news. Joseph Harmon has come to represent different things to different people. I think I gave comments to one of the newspapers, and I said that I think that Joseph Harmon is a victim of circumstances, and that I felt he is a better political leader than he has been made out to be, or that he has become over the last 2 years or so. I don't think he's a weak leader. I don't think he's a weak leader. I don't think. I don't think he is a lackluster leader as he seem to become in the last 2 years. And that didn't go down well by the detractors and so on. So people seem to have developed strong views around Harman. We'll try to tease that out. How has that come to be? And then finally, we talked about power sharing being on the table as a result of the USAID. The president or the PPP said that there are conditions for power sharing, and their condition is free and fair election, whatever that means. And then Aubrey Norton responded that his condition would be a clean voters list. And like somebody tell him, boy, you don't put a big thing like that. You put a condition like clean voters list, and the people give you a clean voters list what they think is a clean voters list. But I notice he has expanded his list of conditions for power sharing. The question for me is whether an issue like power sharing, a profound issue like power sharing, there should be any issues attached to it. Are these people already starting to play games or what? We're going to be talking about all of those issues. So wherever you are, welcome to Politics 101. And tonight we are going to roll, of course, my guest, Tabitha Sarabo Halley. Somebody sent me something recently and said, I'm talking about Tabitha S. Halley. And I had to correct them and said, S is not one of her names. And thing. Elson Lowe, who has become a regular, I noticed his boy just up in his suit and tie tonight. Henry, you know, them young boys, thing. And Henry Jeffrey. Good night, everyone, and welcome to Politics 101. Let's start with the impact of the war going on there, and it seemed to be having an impact on our economy, and markets, and prices going up, and so on. Are people overreacting, or has the impact begun to be felt already?
All right. Well, first of all, good night to everyone. Good to be here. What I would say is I think the impact definitely is being felt already, because there was a very significant jump in gasoline prices in the last week, almost a 20% jump from one day to the next. But the way to think about what is going on with this war and how it will affect the cost of living and prices now and over the course of the rest of the year is that there are three real major areas that it will affect prices, and we'll have to see the extent to which this continues and carries forward over the course of the year. The first being a direct effect at the pump, that is to say, higher gas prices. That's an immediate effect just from the fact that there's been a movement away from Russian oil and a movement instead towards other countries' oil, which is sending the price of gas up. Now that is also because a lot of refiners of crude oil are unwilling to touch Russian oil for fear that they may come by one means or another be hit with sanctions either now or in the future. So that's one thing that's directly driving the price of gas at the pump up. The other is that many things are either manufactured from petroleum products or involve petroleum products in the production when it comes to fuel. And so a lot of other products, regular manufactured goods, the price of those is likely to go up over the course of the year. And then the third way, which is something that you had mentioned, which I think is not yet done, is that we've seen the price of wheat, which is Russia and Ukraine are large wheat producing areas. We've seen a substantial jump in the price of wheat. In fact, Namilco indicated that from I think February 15 to now, the price of wheat had jumped up 40%. They have increased their price by 15%. But given that that is only about, just less than a third of the overall increase, it would seem that there will eventually be further increases in the price of flour. And so that is going to be something that's going to affect food costs. Of course, that will affect other food costs as well, because foods that are a substitute, let's say corn as an example, or rice that might be substitutes that people might eat instead of eating as much flour-based goods. Though prices on them will go up as well because people will switch from the flour-based goods to those other goods, increasing demand and increasing prices, at least in the short term, for those goods. So I think that that picture, that outlook for the rest of the year, especially for those at the lower end of the income scale, is not the best. And unfortunately, we anticipate that, or I would say a lot of economists anticipate inflation numbers to remain elevated over the course of the year, and even the inflation numbers that came out recently in the States. We started the year at about 7%, and we've gone up to 7.9% rate of inflation, which is the highest for a very prolonged period of time. And as that is continuing to go up, it implies that we've still got high levels of inflation, increases in the cost of living, and that the average Guyanese is going to be under a bit of pressure this year. Now, this, of course, depends a bit on how the conflict in Ukraine resolves. However, I think that because some of the sanctions have been put in place, and because this war is taking place in Europe itself, those sanctions are likely to linger for some time. So I am not optimistic that we'll see a very substantial reduction in these inflation numbers in the short run. I think these are going to be around over the course of the year. But let's see. Maybe we can try and be a bit more optimistic than that.
Dr. Jeffy, let me bring you in here. One of the viewers is saying war and politics are part of the same. Yes, here he's saying war and economics are two branches of the same tree. You and I are trained as political scientists, and we know political economy, and we would have learned about the military-industrial complex and all of those things. But I would have thought those things would have been gone with the Cold War, over 30 years ago. Are you surprised at how quickly what's happening there? It's only been 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks into the war. How quickly it has seeped down into a small country like
Guyana? A small country like Guyana, you said?
Yes.
No, I mean, we live in a globalized society, and everybody knows this is not when Morris Bishop and that lot was thinking. Everybody knows what's going on at almost immediately. It's just-in-time arrangement we have. And therefore, no, I'm not surprised at all that has occurred. Of course, I know there's the other side to this, that Guyana might well benefit a little bit from this increase in oil prices. And therefore, perhaps we must think of buffering the working people with that increase. You see, if war is simply an extension of politics, we learned that in politics. That's what your friend was trying to tell you there. War is only politics by another means. You can't get your way this way, we're going to try to get it anyway. Politics is about trying to determine who gets what, when, and how. The first thing you learn, politics 101. And when you can't get it away, you go to war. When you can't do something with your friend, you go to war. That's when trade unions can't get what they want, they strike. So effectively, war is effective. That is what war is all about. And if you are going to struggle for the democracy and democratic conditions, you must be prepared a little bit to pay the price. I mean, America will pay a heavy price to it. All those financial arrangements and things like that they are doing, they'll pay. And Guyana can't get away from that. They will have to pay their price. But Guyana is lucky at this point of time that it's producing oil. And in my view, what that windfall, so to speak, should be utilized to try to buffer people that will face these kinds of increases. So I am not at all surprised that it has seeped down. And there are other implications outside of the economic implications that was just spoken about. Of course, we have got to look at the political implications. I mean, obviously, Russia has allies in the region. And those allies, I mean, I see Nicaragua, our neighbor Venezuela, Cuba, they are allies of Russia. And they have come out in support of Russia, as a matter of fact. And therefore, Russia would also try to use the leverages that it has there to try and pressure the Americans. It's not surprising. There might be other things, other arrangements having to do with oil and the nature of the regime in Caracas. But certainly that's one of the reasons that Americans have gone to Venezuela to talk to the Venezuelan government, just like they are speaking to China about the possible implication for China sending arms to Russia, support in any way to Russia. So that's another thing we must look at, because it has. Hello?
Yes, we are hearing you.
No, yes. So that's one thing, and as I said, that has political implications. You see, what's going on in Russia is, you're saying it's not. The Ukraine wanted to join NATO. Russia doesn't want Ukraine to join NATO. It believes that you're bringing possibly enemies to its borders. To put simply, it's an important issue in international relations. You are in politics, you know about democratic peace theory, maybe what started with Immanuel Kant way down in the 18th century. And essentially what it says is that democratic countries don't make war with each other. And if you go back, way back, they don't. So effectively, that don't mean they are not as aggressive against non-democratic countries. You see, that's Putin's problem. That's a major problem he faces. He has a group of people that maybe would come closer to him, to his borders, that might well be prepared to go to war with him over undemocratic behaviors. And therefore, because you can hardly call Russia a democratic place, nobody would do that knows anything about politics. And therefore, he has a major problem. Democratic countries don't go to war with each other. Look what happened. I think the nearest they ever came, here we go again, Guyana, maybe during the 1899 Venezuela border dispute, when the British refused to go to arbitration, and America said they'll go to war. The Monroe Doctrine holds, and they will go to war if the British don't go to arbitration. Obviously, the British went to arbitration, and effectively that didn't happen. And it is generally accepted, more or less widely accepted in the literature, that they don't go to war with each other because of what we will call cultural and institutional arrangements they have. The cultural arrangement has to do with a democratic country seems, and particularly liberal democracies, seems to rely on negotiations, discussions, going to court, get your matter solved in that way. And and structurally, they have separations of power. They have mass media. It's not easy to go to war. I doubt if Russia was a real democratic place, Putin could have gone to war. He would have had to be explaining himself. He'd have a proper opposition, that kind of a thing. So that is a major issue that he faces. And if what they're saying is correct, that his intention is to rebuild the Russian Empire, well, that's not going to happen if he goes strictly in a liberal democratic manner. So that's a major problem for him. So there are those issues that even affect our people around here. As I said, Cuba, Nicaragua. You notice the people that are supporting are essentially supporting the Soviet Union. They are not in the region known to be democratic countries either. They might claim so, but they are not. I believe even in little Guyana here, the government here can perhaps go and start a war without much problems because Ghana don't have what we'll call a united public opinion. You have a situation where the PPP says something, they got their supporters going to go with it. The PNC says something, their supporters go with it. So there's no united public opinion to stop anybody from doing anything. So and that may be when you introduce the whole thing about the USAID report is why the Americans are coming back clearly and saying, if they're telling Russia fighting for democracy, you can't have that sort of thing in a country where any one party, any one person, because when you start talking about parties, at the end of the day, you start talking about individuals, oligarchies. The head of the oligarchy can come out and make all sort of decisions about important issues. Guyana's oil. If you don't have consensus about where you're going, have some, or if there's not consensus, some capacity in the country to stop wrongdoing, where are you going? So effectively, that has serious political implications for places like Guyana. So that's how I view it. These things are interrelated in many ways, but we see the economic because it hits poor people immediately. And as I said, what we are going to be partly the beneficiary of these oil increases and so on. So maybe we should say that the extras we are getting from that, the windfalls from that, should really be targeted to the working people. But then again, who's to say that would happen? The government can do what it wants and just walk. There is nobody to tell them what to do.
Dr. Henry Jeffrey, political scientist, former lecturer at the University of Guyana. Tabitha Sarif also lectured for a while at the University of Guyana. One of your majors at university was in political science. So I will ask you a question. What's your perspective on the political and economic implications for Guyana?
First of all, good evening to you. Good evening to everyone here and to your viewers. I think there are a lot of things happening at the same time. The reality, though, is that inflation started before the war. And so we have to also understand that that was creeping up on us before the war actually started. And it will continue. The war would, I think, would overemphasize it. But it's something that was happening. And if it is that you're on the ground in Guyana, you would recognize that the number of persons that are in the country that are not Guyanese have increased substantially over the last year and a half. And I think that has an impact in terms of demand and supply. And that is affecting some of our prices as well. I'm not negating anything that Elson Lowe would have said in terms of what is happening with Ukraine, but the prices have also been going up because of the fact that there's still, the supply has not shifted or changed, but the demand has increased in Guyana. And so the equilibrium in terms of the prices would increase. And so we have that going on as well as the war. And so it will, as Dr. Jeffrey said, will have the greatest of impact negatively on the working people. And so we have to make decisions as to how it is we should deal with that, and not wait too late to deal with it. I am of the opinion, one, that we should not wait till year end to increase salaries for public servants. I think that would be a bad place to be at this particular point, given everything that is happening economically in the society, and the fact that we that we are going to get a lot more monies from the oil this year. The reality, though, is, and this is what is also very important, the Natural Resources Fund, and why it is we were against, at least I was against, 100% withdrawal of that monies into budgetary allocations that we really do not know where the money is going, leaves no money for emergency. And so now we are in a crisis in the country. There is no money left over to deal with that crisis, because we would have decided that 100% of that money that was there will go directly into infrastructure, because we really do not know where that money is going. They just put it in the consolidated fund and we're going to use it. And so we're at a place now where the average Guyanese cannot really buy what they need to survive, the necessities. Everything has raised. And we really need to deal with this frontally. I think there's a lot going on in society, yes, but if it is that our people don't have food to eat today, that should be a problem for us today, and we can deal with the other things later. And I don't think enough is being done to highlight this issue and highlight the economic impact that, yes, the war, and two, with this whole oil and gas and all of the people coming in the country and the inflation that is happening because of all of those things, the impact that it is having on the average Guyanese, and what we need to do to deal with that immediately. So I think that is something that needs to be discussed with some amount of urgency, because we will be a section of this society will fall behind if it is that we don't grasp at it very early. Outside of that, I think the politics of the Ukraine and Russia, I think Dr. Jeffrey dealt with it quite well, as what is happening there. And the reality is that Ukraine, in trying to get into NATO, put itself in the middle of something, and they had to know that it would have led to something of this nature. I think they may have expected a little bit more of assistance, given the fact that they're sort of putting themselves on the line to get into NATO, and allowing US to come in, NATO to come into Ukraine, what that would mean for NATO and mean for EU. They expected a little bit more from the West than they're getting. And so I think they're probably wondering whether or not they made the right decision, but they're already in it. And so they have to ride it through and hope that in the end it works in their favor, given all that has already happened in their country with the deaths of their citizens and the infrastructural damage that has occurred thus far. In terms of Guyana, I saw that the United States was next door in Venezuela quite recently, claiming that they were only there to ensure that 2 of their citizens got back home, and that they were making sure that other US citizens that are in prison are doing okay. But we know that there's more coming from that particular engagement. The fact that senior people were able to go into Venezuela and have discussions. And out of that, they're saying, no, the US has actually made statement, US State Department has said that they're hoping that the president that the US has now saying is the president of Venezuela, and Maduro, could come back to the table and have discussions to come to some consensus. And so we would see something, I believe, going in that direction pretty soon, because I don't think the United States would go in that route without knowing what the outcome is likely to be and being so public about it. So we wait to see how that goes and what that means for Guyana and Venezuela relations in the future.
And certainly we are next door to Venezuela. Whatever happens there will have some direct impact on us. Elson, come back in. A lot has been said by Dr. Jeffrey and Tabitha Sarbo. They've raised some questions. Dr. Jeffrey raised the question that the economic impact could be offset down the road by the windfall that we are likely to get if the prices of oil remain there for some time. Tabitha raised the question that all the money from the Natural Resource Fund is gone, so that there is nothing to draw down in a moment of crisis. Let me ask you pointedly, do you think we've reached crisis point at the economic level? And then you can respond to the other points raised by your two co-panelists.
Sure. Well, I think it might be easy for someone who is sitting living comfortably to say that there's not a crisis, but I think that the average person on the street would say that there is a crisis and that they are seeing their standards of living really come under tremendous pressure. Again, I would caution that as much as we've seen actually oil prices come back off in the past few days, because of the nature of this conflict, it is likely that we may see sustained higher prices and sustained sanctions and these sorts of things. So we'll have to keep an eye as to whether or not those will abate or persist. But, unfortunately, it seems that they'll persist. Now, I actually spoke earlier this week regarding redistributing some of these higher earnings to help to cushion the impact on consumers, and I think to some extent the government is in agreement with that. One particular area is regarding GPL, which was mentioning that the cost of fuel oil for them had gone up substantially, and they were hinting that they might need to raise electricity rates. Now, we've heard the government come out to say that they're not going to be raising those rates, and they're going to try and absorb that shock as much as possible. But it seems to me, quite obvious that we should take short-term gains and try and ease the pain of people on the ground. We're not talking about a long-term change in policy, but we do need to ensure that things are at least, standards of living are stable in the country on a short-term basis. And one classic example is we cannot allow electricity costs to go up. And we really shouldn't allow, whether we can operate through some form of a cash grant or something, we shouldn't be allowing citizens at the lower end of the income scale to feel the real brunt of this high inflation. We should rather be looking to cushion that. Of course, the PNC has mentioned quite a few policies that target those at the lower end of the income scale towards ensuring a minimum livable income and towards ensuring that we don't have those at the lower end suffer the most. Partially, though, these policies are based on an understanding that the changes that are being brought about in the oil and gas economy are likely to cause cost of living to increase and there to be a sustained increase. So that's one way to look at it. But at least in terms of the immediate situation, I think that the next year, we definitely need to see some efforts to cushion these impacts. Now, the government has actually put aside $5 billion in the national budget towards dealing with cost of living issues. But of course, this would have been before there was any war. And so I don't know that will be satisfactory. They're saying that they're doing consultations as to how they're going to spend this $5 billion. I would hope that those consultations would include the opposition and other parties, but I think that might be a frustrated hope. And it's just unfortunate that that's the road we're on right now. I suspect they may need to come back for a supplementary budget, but as MP Sarbuhali is saying, you can't come back for a supplementary budget if there's nothing there to come back to. And so I think that may be something that may hamstring them a bit. We had, of course, advised, or at least one of the things we had said when they said that they were going to spend all these monies, is that it's not advisable to spend all of these monies at once, but to have some degree of reserve, because oil prices are incredibly volatile. As much as we're talking about the spike, and we saw a spike from around $100 to $139, oil today is $96 or $97 a barrel. So that is a very tremendous difference. And as a result, it means that one must operate with a degree of caution. I just, throw one last note, to kind of texture the discussion a bit. when the government announced that they're going to spend all of these oil revenues in the first year with this massive budget, which is about, I think it's almost 4 or 5% larger than the previous year. Now, budgets in Guyana don't increase by that amount year to year, maybe a 10 or a 15% increase. That raised the real question of inflation because they're pumping many more funds into the economy than they would normally be pumping into the economy on a year-over-year basis. And so that already perpetuated the inflation that we saw in the pandemic. It raised concerns about inflation over the course of this year. Now we've got this war, which raises further concerns about inflation. And there is a question of how the government will respond, given they've already committed all of these funds to, as the MP mentioned, things like the big infrastructure packages and so on, the benefits of which will not be seen for many years. So I think the government has painted themselves in a corner a bit. And, I think they're absolutely desperate for that first shipment of oil to come in. I think we've got some monies from royalties already, I think 23 million from royalties. But they're desperate for that oil money to roll in so that they can try and correct for the overspending and the poor planning that we saw in the last national budget.
Elson Lowe, economist, Tabitha, sorry, Dr. Jeffrey, is there anything that either of you would like to add before we move off the subject? Dr. Jeffrey?
Yeah, just one thing, because I know that there is a feeling that the West could do more for Ukraine. And that feeling, when people say more for Ukraine, they seem to think that the West should become involved military in Ukraine. I'm afraid I am not of that view, because I do not want President Putin to send a nuclear weapon, a nuclear missile in Guyana. Ukraine is not a part of NATO. The minute NATO goes into Ukraine, you expand the war. And you allow Putin to say, I can do anything now in NATO and their allies. So effectively, I just want to mention that it is, look, when Putin started this war, he think it was a 2-day war. Look what he has gotten. That might end up to be a guerrilla war forever. The West have done a lot. They've done a lot of training in there. They have done a lot of things. Some of their best advisors might be still in the air. And that's why they can hold this out and hold the line. But the minute you get military involved in Ukraine as NATO, you give Putin the right to do anything he wants, send a bomb to London or something, some missile or wherever we want, Paris or any such thing. So I just want to make that clear, because I know there's a widespread feeling that people should be military involved in their NATO as such. Maybe there are other things they can do, and I've seen that they have done quite a lot. I mean, I'm not in the West, and I don't particularly. But when you are expanding and can cause problems that can affect me, I just thought that I should make that a little intervention.
Well, no, I completely agree with everything Dr. Jeffrey said. But when you listen to on the ground in Ukraine, you get a sense that the people had greater expectations, and so I was responding from that basis. I agree with you. I don't expect them to go in militarily. I don't think it would be the right move for them to do that. But they have to do as much as they can in the background to sort of help them sustain what is happening there. And to hold off Putin for as long as they possibly can. So we see where it goes. And I'm more interested in what happens next door to us and how that impacts us in the long run, because the fact that the US is looking here suggests that they of course we know it's always about their agenda right now. and anywhere where they can go, so they don't necessarily have to go to Russia at this point, becomes a good place for them at this stage. And so we wait to see how that works itself out.
I was quite. Yes, go ahead, Henry.
Because Vito raised the issue of Venezuela. Venezuela is in deep trouble with all these financial arrangements. Venezuela moved a lot of its financial and other administrative arrangement away from the West. Think it was protecting itself into the Russian orbit, some in Moscow itself. So effectively, all these financial things now, they maybe can't get their money out the banks in there because the Russian can't get money out of the banks. Venezuela going to be in serious problems. So when you see they're going to speak to Venezuela, Maduro has got to sit down and say, listen, this here is not a joke thing. They're just coming to beg me for nothing. Because if all those sanctions they put, the financial sanctions they put out there, I might need to get my money out. I might not be able to do it. So effectively, I just wanted to make the point that Venezuela is in a serious problem. Also, the sanction is directly related to Russia. The way Venezuela has tied itself up in Russia in the previous years mean it is going to be affected badly.
Let me ask you all this, because I was amazed at how the ordinary Guyanese on the ground, as I moved about the market, in the villages and so on, how keyed in people are to this war. And I know that all of us move in different circles, but what have you all been hearing from the people that you all have been interfacing with and so on? What are some of the sentiments on the war you all have been hearing? Starting with you, Elson.
Well, I think that you hear a lot about the potential for a World War III or something. A lot of pop sensationalist talk. I think we've kind of got a lot of that because of the size or the scale of the actors that are involved. So you hear a bit of that. Though what I would say is, I think that maybe the average person just has a sense that something big is happening, but maybe not some of the specifics. The two, speaking from a political science point of view, the two or three things that I'm particularly paying attention to are, one, whether there'll be any incursion into Poland, whether accidental or intentional, which might trigger, I think it's Article 5 of the NATO agreement, and escalate the war. Of course, Poland has a historic place in European wars, which is not enviable in that it sits between Germany and Russia. And as a result, there's terrible paranoia around anything regarding Poland. And, the Second World War began based off of invasions into Poland. So that is, I think, something that people should maybe keep an eye on. Of course, there was recently an attack right on the border with Poland. Poland was looking to send jets. Those are things I think are more dangerous than perhaps is anticipated. I also think, though, and this is an interesting question from a really an international relations standpoint, there's a question as to whether if Putin gets bogged down in Ukraine, he might use a tactical nuclear weapon. And that is something that I think terrifies a lot of people. I think Dr. Jeffrey is very much terrified by this, as I think he should be. But the reason for that is that, one of the debates, even in the Vietnam War, where there was heavy guerrilla warfare, was as to whether the US should use a tactical nuclear weapon to kind of end that war. And indeed, the reason that they used nuclear weapons in Japan was because of intense resistance by the Japanese, or at least that's what we've heard. So as a result, there's that question as to whether that will in turn escalate the war just by virtue of the use of such a weapon, which I think the nuclear powers have avoided because they don't want that type of escalation to be considered acceptable. However, it would be interesting to see if this war continues to be a guerrilla war in the way that Dr. Jeffrey is implying, whether a tactical nuclear weapon is used. And given that it's so close to the rest of Europe, what reaction that produces. But the last thing I would say is, and this maybe is going to be the most lingering effect of all of this, is that Germany has decided to double its military budget. And that, they have resisted rearming for a very prolonged period of time. So that is an interesting change. I don't know that the average Guyanese is picking up on all of these things, but I get the feeling from a bit of tension that they can tell that this is not like a conflict, and there are a lot of racial undertones to a lot of this. This is not like a conflict in Iraq or Syria. This is a conflict which has much larger implications if there is an accident, and of course that is sad because there's some racist undertones there, but that I think is what's going on.
Tabitha, I know you usually listen to young people a lot. What are you hearing?
Well, for the most part, is people the West actually goes to war with each other. You actually find that these two countries that are predominantly white people that are fighting each other over something, and so now persons are trying to understand the history and the dynamics and the whole thing about what Russia really means, and the sentiments that the West would have towards Russia, and the whole understanding of NATO is now creeping in. People are now trying to understand the dynamics behind the war, because as far as we all know, what you hear on the television is some war is happening in a country where people are primarily brown skin. And so it's a new idea for a lot of young people that this can happen in the West, and say, well, if it is happening there, then it can happen anywhere. So it's more of that kind of intrigue by what is happening there. But I agree with some of what Elson was saying, and it will be quite interesting to see how it plays itself out. Because you don't know where Putin's head is at. He, as Dr. Jeffrey said, he expected it to be 2 or 3 days. The fact that he has been there for so long, what does that mean for him in the long run? Does he have the strength that everybody else thought he had to ensure that he wins this war? If he doesn't, how does that make him look and Russia look on the world stage? It's one thing to pretend to be bad, and but when you show yourself and then you're not as bad as people think you are, then you have to deal with those dynamics as well. So it is. I'm really looking to see how this plays itself out, and how the West will treat Russia moving forward. Really looking to see how this plays itself out, and how the West will treat Russia.
Dr. Jeffrey?
Yeah, no, speaking, let me just mention just one little thing I made here. Of course, the dropping of the bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki it's an interesting debate of whether or not the war was already won. And therefore the bombing of those places was unnecessary and was just done as a warning to the Soviet Union. But there's that in the literature. I put that there. But let me say this about Putin. It is true that if you are pushed in a corner, he already started talking about nuclear weapons and all that sort of a thing. And whether or not it is to scare people or not, it is something that you always have to be aware of. But I'm afraid I believe that he wouldn't do it, because I don't think it will get very far. It might even fall back in Russia. I think people, the minute you go to this sort of, you have this sort of war, you are prepared that this is a possibility. This is an autocratic country that can do what it likes, and perhaps it can do it. So you would have been focusing your equipment, artillery, whatever you want to call it, on that expectation. And Putin must know you will be doing that with all your satellites and so on. That if he even tried it, I don't think you'll get beyond the borders of Russia.
Okay. We spent more time than we thought on this matter, but it is an important matter. And I am very glad that we're able to ventilate a lot. You know, a place like Guyana, we were first part of the empire, and it meant being a part of an empire. We were always in the middle of what's happening in the world. You know, my generation, Henry, we would get our news from the BBC. You know, we knew what was happening in Africa, in Asia. And I would hear the big men at the line talking about the Vietnam War. When I was a kid, didn't know much what was happening, but we were always part of the empire. And now, part of the global world and part of geopolitics as a result of our oil. I think we are back to that place where we are in the middle of these international relations events. So I'm very glad that we're able to spend some time on it. Let's go to the Joe Harmon resignation from Parliament. And Tabitha and Nelson, I know that you guys are part of the APNUFC, so you can opt out of this topic if you want. But of course, it's totally up to you all to comment. So I'll start with Dr. Jeffrey. Henry, was it inevitable that Harmon would go out like this? And is it that he's just resigning, or has he been pushed out?
I read your little piece and I heard what you just said, that Harmon is a victim of circumstances. I am not certain what kind of victim he was. He was at the top of the table. There was a time when people almost thought that Harmon was running the country. So effectively, I am not certain that he was that kind of a victim that you want to make. I think they make a whole lot of wrong moves. And the worst of them all was the president, which Harmon must have agreed with. Decision that he's going to bypass the whole PNC executive and send and go to who he wants the parliament as opposition leader. I mean, that was really terrible. I mean, I don't know how anybody can want to, even the PVP that would face some problems. I mean, I don't know, must be the military style rulership that Mr. Granger is thing of that allow it. How do you do that? You're going to just bypass. You have to have the capacity to sit down and guff people through, discuss with them, tell them why you are doing X and try to explain. Get your henchmen on the ground to try to explain to them. And then you have to come to some kind of consensus. You cannot do that. And the minute he did that, I said, this is madness. This is total madness. How do you do a thing like that? So, and Mr. Harmon must have agreed with him. I think the loss of Harmon, if he decides to just stay aloof from politics, wouldn't be nice for the PNC. I think Harmon got talents that are rare in Guyana. I've said it before. But he placed himself in that position. Maybe one day when Mr. Granger is writing his book, because he says he and Harmon have a vision that for Guyana. Maybe tell us what that vision is. Was or is. I don't know, because I've never seen it. I've never seen their vision. And I would like him to also, when he's writing his book or tomorrow, if he feels like, to tell us why he's holding on to a position that is essentially titular. What is he seeing in being the head of the list and holding on to it? I mean, I am baffled by these things. I mean, he's not a stupid man. Therefore, I've always said to anybody that says must have a reason. And it must, whether or not you agree with his reason, but he must have a relatively good reason. I don't think he's gone berserk. I think he must have a relatively good reason. So, what is happening? What has happened to Mr. Harmon is largely of his own making. But I still believe that you can backtrack rather than jump off the boat. You understand me? You can backtrack and say, look, and do an assessment. When you jump off the boat, people has a feeling, they have a feeling that you just feel bad, and you still believe you're right, and all of that. But they made errors, serious errors. And the result is this had to happen. They had to happen. Wasn't the result of their being in the wrong place and the wrong time. You were being nice. You were trying to be diplomatic. Was their making. And therefore, I don't like the idea of Mr. Harmon leaving the political process if the intent is to stay away from the political process. But maybe there are other ways he can operate in the political arena without being opposition leader, being in parliament. You know what I think of parliament is nonsense. And if he's not the opposition leader, he would not be getting the ministerial salary. I mean, might cut his salaries tremendously, and he can go and do lawyer work and all of. So no, I put all that in it because I sit down and think about these things. I said maybe he can do that. So, but I think it's not good that he has left. But I don't think anybody made that situation for him. He and the former president sat down and created the condition for that. What happened?
Yes, before I go to Tabitha and Elson, you were wondering aloud there, Henry, about what could be the reason for Mr. Granger holding on to that titular position as head of the list. And I too, I'm asking the same question. I did an interview with Edward Seaga after he lost power in '89, and he would not give up. There were challenges to his leadership, and the JLP kept losing and losing and losing. And I asked him, I said, Mr. Prime Minister, you've served in the cabinet, you've served as president, as prime minister, as leader of the opposition. You've done everything in politics. Why you keep holding on? And he said to me, when a leader is giving up power, he has to be certain that he's leaving the institution in good hands. He looked me straight in my face and told me that, and he said he was not satisfied that his party, the leadership that he had, was ready to take the party to the next level. Maybe I throw that out there to say maybe.
But that doesn't give him power to do anything. It is not that it doesn't give him power to do anything, because they can override that by voting in the parliament to put people in. It makes him not look good in the public domain. I could understand what you're saying if it gave them the authority to do something substantial about who is leader and who is not.
Tabitha, you want to make a comment or not? Or?
I don't think at this moment I should make a comment.
Right.
I will opt out at this stage.
Right, no problem. Elson, any comment on this issue?
All I would say is I want to thank Mr. Harmon for his service. I worked along with him, and it was a pleasure to work with him. So I'm thankful for his service. I'm thankful for the opportunity to work and to assist him. I look forward to working with the new leader of the PNCR and whoever it is that becomes the leader of the opposition. I look forward to working with them as well and supporting going forward. We must acknowledge that Mr. Harmon made lots of contributions to Guyana, to Guyana's development, and to, the APNU and the PNC and the coalition more broadly. So we thank him for his service, and, we continue to work to try and bring the country forward.
Thank you. And let's move over to what's happening there at GCOM. The GCOM started this outsource registration. The PNC doesn't like it, but they're advising their people to go out and register nevertheless. Henry, could this new household registration lead to a clean voters list? You have had a lot to say about that voters list, the current voters list.
I don't believe that it could, unless you have rules that get rid of all those people on the list that are dead and are abroad. I think that the CARICOM made the point quite clear. A clean voters list, a new one, I think they said, is the minimum that is required for any new elections in Ghana. They might be focusing on national elections, but effectively, I think that first of all, the process of doing the list is a thing, is one thing. A voters list should be done by consensus, regardless of what the law says. Regardless of what the law says. You have a major problem. You have an election the last time. 5,000 people were recorded as voted that was dead or abroad or whatsoever. Any new voters list should be done by consensus. You don't have consensus. All you have is the one side who appear to have benefit from the last is saying they want to go back with the same list, but everybody else is saying that you require a new list. It is not true, and it has happened in other places that people can vote when they are not supposed to vote. But it is not about subs, about what is there in the day. Voting is about what it is supposed to be in there in the day also. And it seemed like a lot of things were there in the day that were not supposed to be there in the day. And therefore, any new voters list should be arrived at by consensus, not by Eddie Bumper telling us the law. These things lead to all manner of things. The law has proved itself incapable of bringing a proper election in Guyana. We are now at an election petition. You can't even get it done in a timely manner. So it's no use you tell people that. This is politics. Politics require, and I think that the Americans in their same report on democracy is making the point. The problem is that you're not getting consensus. And therefore, that is a position that the PNC and anybody I would take, that I do not want a list that has not arrived by some consensual approach. And I do not believe this. And then you have to go and mobilize your people to do what is necessary to get it. The PNC, the PPP didn't want the constitutional reform at the end of the year, in 2000, 1999, 2000. They didn't want to leave it to them. It would not have happened. But you have to, that's what politics is all about. The PPP would not have taken it. Hoyt did not want counting of votes at the place of poll. But what did PPP do? The PPP went, and others, you too, David, you and you went, what's happening to each other? You went out there and you mobilized and you got it. This is not just sitting down and say the law says we don't have to count the votes at the place of poll. The law said that then too. So if you feel that you can sit down and run politics by saying what the law said, the law would only be, the law would benefit those who benefit from the law. So I think I always want the law to say the same thing. So effectively, that is my position.
Yeah. And Dr. Jeffrey's making the point there that's on the lips of a lot of opposition supporters. He's making the point that when In 1990, the opposition felt that there was need for open, free, and fair election. They just didn't talk about it. They went out and made it happen. And in 1997, when Hoyt wanted constitutional reform, decided he put people on the streets every day, and he made it happen. People are saying every day it's an indictment of the opposition, that they keep saying things, but they're not making it happen. I don't want you two young people to fetch that basket here tonight. So I'm not saying that. Leave that to me and Henry.
No, I actually want to respond here. I I want to respond here. I am of the view, and I agree with what Dr. Jeffrey is saying. I think as the opposition that we need to be a bit more clear as to what exactly our agenda is and how we're going to get to it. I think we keep saying things too much and then doing something else. And that gives our supporters an unclear sense of where it is that we're going and what it is that we are trying to achieve. And if we continue down this road, then we will be our own worst enemies. And so I believe that if it is that we want something, we have to say this is what we're doing and we go down in that particular direction. I think for too many issues from August 2020 to now, we keep saying X, and then 2 days later, we end up doing Y. And then we have some reason to say why we had to do Y instead of the X which was our initial position. And I think we need to come to a place where we recognize that the PPP is not playing fair. They have never played fair. And you cannot stand and say you're standing on something that exists that doesn't work in your favor and you're going to allow it to continue to your own detriment. So I think we need to be a bit more clear as to what our agenda is, what it is that we want, how it is we're going to get what we want, and to stick to it and so that we can get the best out of the situation that we're currently in.
Do you think the household registration would lead to a clean voters list?
No, of course not. It would not. But let me say something. What they're currently doing will not lead to a clean voters list. What because it's continuous registration they're doing, not the house-to-house registration that we were initially asking for, and that would not lead to a clean voters list. And so, how our approach to it should have been a bit different. My belief is our approach to it should have been a bit different, but it isn't, and we're dealing with that right now. I think we really need to be clear among ourselves as to what exactly we are trying to attain and stick to it. And I think we're not doing that. And so our supporters are, I'm quite sure right now, they are unsure as to where we are heading. A lot of persons are uncertain when you hear from people. They're not sure what it is that we're doing, because we seem not to be clear and we unwilling to fight for what exactly we believe in. We seem to believe in something, but then when things come a bit too thick at us, we turn a corner and find a way to say, you know what, we don't necessarily believe in this, but we're willing to work with it. And I think we've been doing that for too long and we need to stop it.
The views there of a young member of the parliamentary opposition, we call it self-criticism. A lot of Guyanese don't like it. They say, don't hang your linen out. I have nothing to do with the views expressed there tonight. I was once our teacher years ago. Yes or no? Do you think we're going anywhere with this GCOM exercise as far as the clean voters list is concerned?
I think that there's a fundamental question that's still to be answered, and that's regarding removing people from the list. I think Dr. Jeffrey spoke a bit about it, but ultimately, unless there's an exercise that's going to remove people from the list cannot be clean. It can be expanded, but it will not be a clean list. And so I think efforts, and this is something that the leader of the PNCR has mentioned as one of his priorities, getting a clean list is vital. Removing those who are not eligible, whether because they are no longer alive or because they don't reside in the country, getting that sorted out, I think is important. I understand there's a decision, I believe it's a High Court decision that's stopping people from being removed from the list. That needs to be, this needs to be addressed so that we can move forward, because otherwise, I don't know whether any of these things, how they will actually add. But that to me is the focus, where the focus of all efforts must be, in terms of removing those who shouldn't be on the list.
And as Jeffrey would say, you need consensus because the courts say that you got to change the law in order to do that. And to change that law, you have to have consensus. Consensus is important. Let's move to President Ali's continued One Guyana story, and that his party and his government want to go down as the champions of One Guyana. I said to somebody at the airport yesterday, I asked, what One Guyana? Jeffrey, what One Guyana?
I'm going to ask President Ali, because I certainly don't know. Because it seems like it's the same thing from Burnham right now I'm hearing about. I mean, essentially, yes. I mean, the minute he says it, he's trying to say that we must come to a point where Guyana is a nation, where we have fellow feelings for each other, where we are willing to cooperate friendly and going along with business and all of that. Yes, I mean, it's been an aspiration since the time of Jenny Jagan and Forbes Burnham in government. They're talking about 50, 70 years. But to just talk it, Forbes Burnham indeed says that his party would have transformed and made Guyana into a nation, even maybe the farthest, and saying these things. It never happened. It didn't happen for 70 years under the present structure. Granger came aboard. He set up a whole ministry of national cohesion. What happened to that? I mean, indeed, the first day President Ali said this thing, I said, oh, you can do that? Show me. As he showed me, since he said that, the situation got worse, not better. The alienation of ethnic groups in this country has gotten worse, not better. And it will not change because there is a fundamental problem that he does not want to deal with. It's the question of who rules me. And that is why when the USI said you have to have some kind of power sharing, and people are throwing up their hands, the PPP don't want it. I don't care what the PPP want. I don't even think maybe the PNC wanted, because they had an opportunity to do it. They had promised and did nothing. I don't really care what the PPP wants, in the sense that must determine what is good for Guyana, because these parties can want a lot of things that are not good for Guyana. We must first determine whether or not it's good for Guyana. Now, serious people have sit down and look at this matter and put it as their main force requirement. And they believe that that's the only way that you are going to have equitability, growth, and cohesion, or whatsoever else you like, inclusiveness in Guyana. So it might well be that the PPP, maybe even the PNC, as I said, don't want it. But Guyanese must determine. But there's no Guyanese, because and that is why they said they are speaking to the PPP and PNC. They're speaking to them because they know that they carry the people. In these kind of countries, that's what happens. They ain't saying that these carry the people largely run with them. So effectively, they're saying these parties must get together and create a functional democracy. In other words, what you have is not a functional democracy. I mean, if you can't understand this, and so President Ali can try what he likes there, he is not going to get very far. Guyana is a bicommunal country. It means quite clearly that you can, let me start by saying Japan. We were talking about Japan when we just began. Japan is more or less a homogeneous kind of a country. Japan, this winner takes all thing would work because nobody can control any racial group as such to turn them against each other. And two strong party control 40% each of the population and all that. So this winner takes all thing. People change opinion over there. They have what almost you'll call a pure united public opinion. If you say some nonsense, people are likely to change their mind and vote for the other side and all. If you go to Britain, even Britain, when push came to shove, what they had to do? They had to devolve power to the regions. They had to give Scotland a parliament. They had to go and give Wales a parliament. They had to do it because there is Scottish nationalism. You can be a Scotsman and still be a citizen and feel strongly about the United Kingdom. But that don't mean you can't be a Scotsman. That don't mean you can't like your family more than you like the state. That is it. So you can be a Scotsman, you can be a Welshman, an Irishman, whatsoever. But that don't mean you don't feel strongly about the United Kingdom and Great Britain and all that. But that is another level. So they've gone and had to do that. They had to do it to placate the very kind of thing we have. What we have is a bi-communal country, two large ethnic groups. Anything you say, competing for power. Anything you say, I turn up and say, is nonsense. And my people follow me. Your people follow. That is not going to work on half because of the nature of politics. Most of what you do cannot be 100% correct most of the time. So there is always a loophole for me to go and say, what you're saying is wrong. You can't say, oh, it's not, this is a nonsense. It is not the system, is the people. So instead of changing the system to suit the people, they want to change the people. Just change people. How long? Even if it is possible, how many decades? And you change people in the context of conflict? No. People hold on, you don't change them. So effectively, man, it's a mess. Until they have decide that the power sharing the answer to the political relationships in Guyana and the alienation and all that in Guyana, one Guyana is doomed. So he can talk what he likes.
Elson, one Guyana is doomed.
Well, what I'd say is it's pretty difficult for you to have a one Guyana policy if you're not inviting the opposition to flag raisins and you're not consulting with the opposition for the national budget and for all the measures. I think that's going to be a bit of a struggle, But what I would also say is that I think that really in Guyana, until we deal with some of these original sins, I think we're really going to struggle to form a united country. And, the circumstances around independence, the international, involvement, the narrative that, this group, did this to this group and this group did that to the other group. I think we've not dealt with a lot of these things. And as a result, a lot of this distrust and antagonism persists throughout and has persisted throughout, the history of the country. And so I think that those things need to be properly addressed in order for us to have some sort of progress on that front. And until they are addressed, I don't think that we'll get direction that we, or fully what we wanted to see. However, I do think that we must also acknowledge that, it's not that people haven't recognized some of these things and made efforts to try and bridge the gap and to change the nature of the politics. And, I find it interesting that some people were surprised by the emergence of parties like the AFC I am in no way surprised or find it even interesting that the AFC emerged. It was entirely predictable given the structure of the society. And so that is something that you would anticipate coming out of a democratic process, that a compromise party would gain some sort of prominence. Of course, as time has passed, circumstances have continued to evolve, and I personally think that we've taken steps back in terms of racial progress. And I think the One Guyana slogan is just that, a slogan without any substantial and direct policies to carry forward, racial progress. So that, unfortunately, is the way that we stand. I think that, we as a country need to have a long, hard discussion about the role of the British. I think that, we not necessarily an antagonistic discussion, but a serious discussion about the role of the United States. Again, not necessarily an antagonistic discussion, but a serious discussion, because I think that, a lot of the conflict really has come out of that initial independence period. And as a result of that, I think those narratives are perpetuated in ways that you might not expect and have formed the bedrock of the reason that there's so much tension. And one of the things I even express to people is that it is, again, in no way surprising or even interesting that a former British colony has ethnic strife. This happens all over the place. This is classic British, it's very normal for the colonial powers to engage in these types of policies. So we must stop thinking about them as interesting and unique and deal with them by looking at the British, the US, and how they've operated historically, assessing those things and coming to an understanding. I think without doing that, it seems to me to be a bit of a futile exercise.
Farbo.
A lot has been said. Let me start this. When you hear the term One Guyana, you assess it based on the actions of the individual or the group that is touting the particular phrase. And based on the actions of the president and the PPP, it is obvious that One Guyana means something different than what we perceive it or we think it should mean. As far as I understand it, I think it means the subjection of one group over the other. It means not having a formidable opposition. It means the opposition acquiescing and agreeing with everything the PPP does. It was quite clear when a couple of days ago, when some civil society organizations came out against a particular issue, that the response that they got from the PPP suggests that nobody should say anything negative about me. So One Guyana suggests PPPs and at least One Guyana means subjection. It means agreeing with everything that I say and I do, and then we could be friends and we can work and live together in this country. And that is not a One Guyana that I think that we deserve and we should accept, or we should even for my own view is that this whole idea of One Guyana should just be thrown in the garbage, and we get to actually dealing with what it would really mean to bring the society together, and that is the power sharing issue. I think everything that Elson has said, I think yes, there's a need for discussions to happen, but I think we've passed that stage in the sense that even if there is discussion, the realities exist, and the realities are that no one group wants the other group to be in control of them and their future and what happens to them and represent their interests. I don't believe that the other group could adequately represent their interests, and it's because of that power sharing becomes the only, I think at this particular point, the only option for us to move forward in this country. And so I don't disagree with conversations. Conversations are always good. I think we are at a place where we've been speaking for a very long time. We've been speaking for over 50 years, and we recognize, at least I recognize, that what it requires is an agreement where both the major ethnic groups feel as if they are in control of their destiny, they're in control of the decision-making process, and all that could only come through some form of power-sharing agreement. So that's what I would say at this point.
I noticed one of my high school teachers is saying there that this discussion is so crucial for the progress of Guyana, that it should be continued. It is important to have the discussion at the grassroots level so that the ordinary citizens can understand. Mr. Earl Boson, my old high school teacher, a man from Bobby's, Angie area, come to Buxton to teach, and he made it very clear to us, you all are going to turn out to be something. And he wasn't afraid to ensure that we know what time of day it is. Thank you, Mr. Boson. It certainly worked wonders. We've come down to the end of the program, and I'll give each of you an opportunity for closing thoughts. And I want to assure Mr. Boson that we're going to continue this discussion, because one of the things that I've learned, especially in a society like ours, is that you have to keep hammering home at these so-called novel ideas, because as Henry Jeffrey has said, you're really coming up against parties that have considerable sway over their supporters. Elson, I'll start with you on your closing thoughts.
Yes, thank you. And, I agree. It's a discussion that needs to be continued. I think, as I said, I think it's not been properly dealt with. And I think, I'd be happy to engage in further discussion. I sometimes want to give people some context. The British, when they were in India, ruled India with, I think something like 20,000 troops versus 300 million people. They use divide and rule tactics. It's not surprising. It's not interesting. We just got to look at history and learn from that. The next thing I would say is, I think that this is something I repeat often and I'll continue to repeat. As we look at what's going on in the country and the economy, as we look at what's going on in terms of cost of living, it is, oil is a funny thing. And it is, if it's mismanaged, if oil resources are mismanaged, you can actually see people's standards of living fall rather than rise. And in Guyana, I think that in the past year or two, maybe a little longer than that, we've seen lots of pressure on people's standards of living, really because of the way that oil resources have been used, as well as the inflation that we've seen coming out of the pandemic. We've seen changes to the economy. We're seeing the impact internationally of changes to the oil and gas environment that we are being affected by directly. And so what citizens need to call for is good governance, is attentiveness to the concerns of those who are most vulnerable. Of course, the PNCR has mentioned a minimum livable income and other policies that would address these needs at the lower end of the income scale. But we need urgent discussions around how we're going to address it and urgent action based off of the existing national budget, as well as any supplemental budgets, because it is not going to be acceptable that people who are most vulnerable, the lower income citizens of Guyana, suffer from these types of spikes in prices and suffer from changes to the oil and gas, changes to the economy brought about by the oil and gas industry. No one ever said or contemplated this as a possibility when we first found oil, and we must do our level best to ensure that the vulnerable do not have a decrease, a fall in their standard of living, even as the country is getting much wealthier.
Free. Closing thoughts, comments.
Well, again, thank you for having me. You started off the program talking about Trinidad and the fast pace at which Trinidad was going when they, in that period when they had oil and everything was for oil for them. And I think that as Guyanese, we need to recognize that Guyana is moving at a very fast pace. And so we need to make decisions urgently and very quickly as to how it is we're going to deal with our issues so that it don't become a lingering and a long-term problem. If we don't deal with it quickly, then we will be in a space where it will be very difficult for us to handle because of how fast the country is moving. It's obvious that the PPP has plans to move it as fast as they could possibly move it. For whatever reasons, I'm not sure, but there are a lot of things that are happening. And if it is that we recognize, one, that half of the country is being left out, we recognize, two, that the PPP at this particular juncture is not willing to speak to the half of the country that is being left out. and third, that they believe that they can just subjugate and do as they feel like, then we need to recognize this and determine how it is we are going to respond. And the response cannot be over the next 5 years. I think it would be wasting way too much time and giving them too much of ground. And then we will have to try to make up that ground. So I think something has to be done in the shortest of terms, period, so that we can resolve our current issues and help the people to recognize that they cannot and will not be able to run this particular country in the way in which that they have been doing over the last 2 years.
Jeffrey?
David, let me say a few things here from what was said before. First of all, this notion that we gotta trust each other is nonsensical. The IRA trusted the Protestant, yet they had a shared governance agreement. The Bosnian trusted their neighbor, yet they have a shared governance agreement. Nelson Mandela trusted the South African system that kept him in prison for 100 years. The America trusts Maduro, yet they're over there negotiating an agreement. They trust Putin, yet they're there discussing with Putin. Nobody got to trust anybody. The truth is that the PPP come out with this nonsense since about 2003, after the PNC put forward their position on shared governance. And since then, 20 years, we have where the trust has gotten worse. You don't have to trust anyone. This don't require trust. What it requires is to sit down and negotiate, come to an agreement to share power, and let us work together. Then we will see if we can trust each other. We can't be in conflict all over the place and you tell me stupidness that we're going to trust each other. When you build the trust, you can't build trust in conditions of conflict. It's foolishness. It has always been foolishness. And I mean, it's just amazing. Everywhere you know that this thing has been implemented, it's out of war situation, out of fighting, out of struggle on the streets. Nowhere did people trust each other. You have to set up the arrangement and put things in place, put structures in place that will allow you to protect your interests and allow anyone to be trying to trample on those interests, or else they will be in problems, just like in Northern Ireland today. It is not a situation of no trust. You don't have to trust anybody. Whatever the British did, it has nothing to do with it. This is our lives. This is 70 years. We are going down the road of, when are we going to build this trust? 70 years, you haven't built it. You're going to wait till you build it. It was PPP nonsense to put off the immediate implementation of shared governance. That is what you have to do. And again, I come back. This is a political struggle. It's not an atom thing that you're going to trust anybody. If you trust anybody, you don't need shared governance. If we trust each other, we don't need shared governance. The Black people will say, good, let the Indians rule me. And then the Indians say, oh, it's fine if the Black people rule me now. And if you try to disaggregate this concept of trust, in the morning when you wake up and you trust yourself to put the foot down, that when you're putting your foot down, it's on your floor. So trust is on a continuum. What level of trust you mean? What level you need to do this? Because it's one thing to trust you and give you all my money to keep, and to not trust you and give you my money to keep. It is all nonsense. And we must put it away, must throw it away. What you need is immediately to sit down and negotiate, get to a position where you sit down and negotiate a shared governance arrangement. As we then work together, we will become better, in a better position to come and trust each other. Now we fighting down the street, cussing each other, and then you come and tell me about trust? Nobody, nowhere you can show me where this arrangement, shared governance arrangement, has been thing as a result of people trusting each other. I don't know why we fall for this nonsense. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jeffrey, saying it like it is. And in case people wondering why Jeffrey's so passionate about this. As he said last time he was on, he didn't start there, but he evolved there as time went on. And while he was part of the PPP government, did try to bring the parties together. People don't know that. Try to bring them together. And there's some of you all that saying, well, you've been in the government where you didn't do that. You see? He liked to do that, said he's thing when we knows his story. Thank you very much, Dr. Jeffrey. Elson Lowe, young Elson Lowe, thank you very much. Tabitha Sarbo, thank you very much. Jeffrey, remember when I started this program a year ago, when we were talking about getting people on, it's when we got to get some of these young people on, talk to this body, talk to the body. Here we are on a program with 3 panelists. We got 2 young guns here, you know. Thank you for your suggestion. It's not all lost. There are young people, like these 2 young people here tonight, who are prepared to say things that may ruffle some feathers, may not come out of the orthodox in book, but they're saying it. It's not whether they're right or wrong, but it's that they have the courage to come on to a program like this and to say, we have made mistakes. Thank you all so much. Brian Cooper, Beckles, Barbados, good night. Glad you're on. And I read in your comments, Rita Singh, good night. I know you've been all night with us here. I want to say thank you all for keeping our company. Tomorrow night, the political parties will be here. I'm bringing the AFC, the PNC, the WPA to talk for themselves and talk as parties. You know, these parties like to hide, you know. I'm bringing them on tomorrow night, the 3 opposition parties, to talk to you all. And I think I'm going to open the phones so that you all can ask them questions directly. That's tomorrow night. Tell Matty, Matty tell Matty that tomorrow night you get a chance to talk to the party leaders themselves. And then on Thursday night, we close off the week with 2 ladies, Coretta McDonald and Vanessa Kissoon, who are running for General Secretary and President of the Teachers Union. I am supporting their candidacies. Politics 101 is supporting their candidacies, and we're going to have them here to tell you what they are going to do for teachers and by extension, the workers of Guyana. Leading the Guyana Teachers Union into the future. Vanessa Kissoon and Coretta McDonald Thursday night. Thank you all so much again for staying with me, and I'll see you all tomorrow night. Bye-bye.
Please help keep Politics 101 on social media and broadcast television. If you are in North America, please donate via Cash App or PayPal.
If you are in Guyana and the Caribbean and don't have access to Cash App and PayPal, email your pledge to dhines6106@aol.com and we will direct you how to get your donation to us. Thank you in advance for your donation.